So this is Mark Gottfried. I've began a new podcast called The Front Row. We're filming this in Newport Beach, California, and just going to have a lot of fun talking about a lot of different topics. And one of the things I get asked the most about is, while I was at UCLA as an assistant coach for 7 years, I got asked a lot of questions about what was it like to be around John Wooden. And I tell people all the time that I've been around some amazing people, amazing coaches, very wise people, but I'm not sure I've ever been in the presence of somebody that I felt was as wise as John Wooden. He won 10 national championships over a 12-year period at UCLA in basketball. Obviously, guys like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bill Walton, and the list just goes on and on and on of the great players that he had that he coached. But one thing that always stood out to me, probably more than anything, were the way he could deliver a thought, and it was a kind of a penetrating way where it made you really stop and think about it. And I would go to his house many times after practice on my way home. I lived in Calabasas, and I had to drive, on the 101 and go past Encino where Coach Wooden lived. And every time I went to his house, I wish I had a catcher's mitt, and I would just try to catch all these, amazing pearls of wisdom that Coach Wooden had. And, I remember asking him one time, you see coaches nowadays, and I was one of them for 35 years, where you're kind of up and down the sidelines and, very active and animated. And, I said, Coach, were you ever that way? Did you yell and scream? At your players or the officials, and tell me kind of your style. And he always had great answers. And the way he answered me that day was, he said, Mark, when I was a young coach, I did scream, I did yell, I was very animated. He said, but as I've gotten older in life, I realized that I would much rather soften my voice and have my players strain to listen than constantly raise my voice and have them cover their ears. And that's an example of, how Coach Wooden, if you asked him a question, it was amazing how he would find ways to answer. And, he told me one time, coaching is a lot like parenting. And he said to me, Mark, it's amazing how a young person's hearing improves when they hear praise. He said, reprimand them, yes, followed by praise. And it's so true for all of us, how a young person's hearing improves when they actually hear praise instead of constant criticism. And so there were so many times with Coach Wooden, we'd sit and talk about leadership. We'd talk about, coaching styles. And some of it was X's and O's. And we'd talk about how he would, teach his 2-2-1 press and different things with the high post offense. But the majority of time with Coach Wooden, it was life lessons. And my first year at UCLA, we had a player who was really talented. He was a good player, and he ended up being a really good player for our first 2 years when I coached there I was there from 88 to 95, but from 88 to 90, we had a young guy named Trevor Wilson, and Trevor was a guy that was kind of tough. He was stubborn. He was kind of set in his ways. He wanted to do things his way. And we came in as a new staff. I was a graduate assistant coach my first year, and I was very young, and I wasn't a whole lot older than some of the players. But we were really having a difficult time because it was somewhat of a power struggle between the new staff and a player that was extremely talented and could really help us win. And I remember one morning we went to breakfast with Coach Wooden, and we're sitting around eating breakfast, and it's October, maybe late October of 1988. It's my first year at UCLA. I'm sitting across John Wooden. He's got syrup coming off his chin, eating his pancakes, and I'm thinking, God, that's John Wooden over there. He's got syrup on his chin. But it was an amazing morning. But I remember we started telling him, and talking to him about, what was going on in practice every day. If we told Trevor to run to this end, he would go to that end. If we said to tuck your shirt in, he'd take his shirt out. And so, it's one of those where coaches, we encounter that a lot sometimes, where it's almost a matter of who has the strongest will. And I remember Coach Wooden saying to us that morning, would you rather have him or would you rather not have him? And obviously we would want to have him. He was a talented player. And I remember Coach Wooden looking at all of us, and I was very young at the time. And he looked right at me and he said, "It's your job to coach him. That's your job. The easiest thing you can do is get rid of him, to kick him off the team." And I think great coaches find a way to connect and coach great players. One of the reasons that makes players so great at times is because they are strong-willed. They do dig in when they feel strongly, or they feel they're right about situations. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. But I think with Coach Wooden, it was a great lesson for me as a young coach. And I coached 35 years college basketball, and I coached some guys that were easy to coach. I coached guys that were hard to coach. But I always go back to remember what John Wooden said, and he said, "Would you rather have him or not have him? And if you'd rather have him, then it's your job to coach him." And coaching him at that time meant, kind of meeting him at a place where you really understood what was going on with Trevor. And then, those lessons stayed with me all throughout my coaching career. So I learned a great deal from John Wooden, probably the wisest, person that I've ever been around. And I learned a great deal, about Coach. And, he was always generous with his time. And everybody that came in contact with John Wooden probably would say the same thing. He made you feel like you were the most important person on the planet, and he made time, and he was never in a hurry. And if a half hour turned into an hour turned into an hour and a half, rarely, did Coach Wooden say, "I have to go," and your time is up. And, there would be nights I would leave UCLA's practice, in Westwood there, right off the 405 in the west side of LA, and I had to drive to Calabasas. And I would go by Coach's house, I'd stop in, and we'd sit down and we'd actually watch the Bob Newhart show together a little bit. And even in those moments, he would find ways to share some pearl of wisdom. So incredibly thankful for the time I had with John Wooden, and wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. And when we have these discussions about who is the best coach of all time, and there's been some great ones, great coaches in every sport. Obviously I'm a product of the University of Alabama, where Bear Bryant was so amazing in football, and Nick Saban has taken that thing to a whole nother level and will go down arguably as if not the greatest or one of the greatest coaches in college football history. You look in the NBA at a guy like Phil Jackson and Red Auerbach, and then in baseball, you can go on and on in every sport. But I would argue with anybody that if there's a Mount Everest of coaching, John Wooden is definitely on the mountain. You can't, in my view, argue that. And great players, but the run of having 10 national champs over a 12-year period of college basketball, it'll never be repeated again for a lot of different reasons. But what an era, and what a phenomenal coach that he was, but also a great, great person. So I had some remarkable moments with John Wooden. I get asked a lot now about in college athletics, even though I'm not coaching now. I coached for 35 years, but I get asked a lot about the NIL and the transfer portal, and I have strong feelings about it. I think it's really damaged college athletics. On one hand, I'm very happy for the players. If you think about the genesis of the NIL, name, image, and likeness, and players having the opportunity to cash in on their name, their likeness, their image while they're a college athlete, I get it, and I'm happy for them. I've played golf a number of times here in Southern California with Johnny Manziel. Johnny Manziel was known as Mr. Football at Texas A&M. He was a quarterback, first-round draft pick in the NFL, and probably Johnny's most marketable time period would have been that time period while he was playing college football. Yet at that time, it was against the NCAA rules to get any kind of money, any kind of compensation for your name, image, or likeness. In other words, selling a jersey, signing autographs, anything like that, doing a commercial, putting your picture on a billboard and getting paid for it by a company. Those were all not allowed by the NCAA, and now those rules have changed. The unintended consequences of the NIL becoming okay for every student athlete, regardless of sport, is that now every student athlete expects that they can receive some money through the NIL. And every player is looking somewhat to the coaching staff who recruited them to that school to help organize and to maybe garner some opportunities for them. Even though coaches aren't supposed to be involved, it's nearly impossible for a coach not to be involved. And through the recruiting process and while the player's on your campus. But the unintended consequence right now is that you have just about every player in the highest level of basketball and football that would expect at some point to get paid something from somebody through a legal avenue. And it's really not the way the rule was ever intended to be. It's really not what college athletics are all about. And so even though I like the fact that student athletes can now be compensated in one way or another for their name, their image, or their likeness, I think the unintended consequences have created an absolute mess. Professional sports, for an example, there are salary caps for the NBA, for Major League Baseball, for NFL. Teams that are in big markets with big television contracts like the Dodgers or the Lakers are much different than the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Cleveland Indians. It's a different market, and there's opportunities and more opportunities for those franchises to get more revenue. College athletics is not built in a way to where they can sustain, and there's no salary cap for each school right now. And the other thing that I think that's interesting right now is there's not a lot of transparency as far as what is actually happening. You know, for example, if you're a college freshman and you're playing football at Ohio State or Alabama or Notre Dame or USC or wherever, and you're hearing that the guy that's 3 lockers over just got an NIL deal for $200,000 to sign autographs on a Saturday afternoon, which is legal, I guess, now with the NCAA. But you don't know if it's actually $200. It might be $200, and he might just be saying it's $200,000. So there's so many parts of the NIL right now that I think eventually need to get ironed out. I think that universities will eventually, not yet, but eventually begin to pay athletes. I think in the state of California that legislation was just passed. So anyway, I just think it's a model that's really difficult right now for college sports. It's putting a lot of pressure on donors that already buy season tickets, already buy seat licensing for their tickets, already donate to any fundraising campaigns. Maybe it's to improve facilities or whatever it may be on those individual campuses. And now the pressure all falls back on the donor to help raise money one way or another for that football or basketball or baseball team, whatever it may be, to be competitive, because you have to understand if somebody else at the top of the food chain is able to offer a player, or somebody in that community can offer a recruit or a player X amount of money, you've got to be able to match it. You got no chance to be competitive if you can't. So anyway, I think the model is one that's got to be tweaked. I'm not sure that it's the current model is what college athletics is all about. I think I've talked to a number of coaches who are my friends who are saying that sometimes in the sport of basketball and football, players literally are having somebody communicate to the coaching staff or whomever at that university that if I don't get $100,000 or if I don't have X amount of money by this time period, and I'm going into the portal. And they can go into a transfer portal and transfer immediately without having to sit out a year, which in basketball and football for the history of time, kids have had to sit out. So on one hand, it's a great problem in that players and student athletes are able to receive that compensation. I think for the NCAA, the next steps now are to iron out and figure out how to manage it, how to police it, how to make sure that everything is the way it's supposed to be. And I mentioned before, just like in pro sports, there is a salary cap for each school. There is an amount of money that you can't go over, and if you do, there's a luxury tax for teams. So I just think there has to be a lot that's going to get worked out, hopefully in the near future. But I think right now, currently, we're kind of in the infant stages in the first couple, 2 or 3 years of the NIL and the transfer portal being instituted at the same time. I think it's causing a lot of havoc. I think it's causing a lot of chaos. And I'm just not sure that's what college athletics is all about. I think it's great, but I think we do have to figure out, the powers that be have to figure out how to manage it in a way to where student athletes can still get some compensation, but on the same time, there's an equitable balance when you look from team to team around the country, because right now, the rich are going to get richer, and some of the schools that don't have those kind of resources, don't have that kind of a donor base in the recruiting game, they're going to fall behind. And so I think right now that's probably more than anything the way I look at the whole NIL and the transfer portal situation. I've got a lot of ideas in regard to the NCAA. I'm not a fan at all. Years and years ago, the basketball coach at UNLV that was very famous, he was an excellent basketball coach, won a national championship at UNLV and coached great players, and later sued the NCAA and won a sizable dispute with the NCAA. But Jerry Tarkanian made a quote years ago, and he said, the NCAA will investigate Kentucky and then put Cleveland State on probation. And, little did we know then how true it actually is. And there's a lot of reasons for that. College athletics, those that are at the top of the food chain, that are your most notable high-profile schools, they have a lot more money that they can spend. And they can spend a lot more money in legal fees to fight any allegations that may be there against a coach or against a team within their school. A lot of times the schools that are not at the top of the food chain, that don't have the revenue source that some of the major schools have, they don't have the money to fight the NCAA. They don't have the desire or the will to do that. And so sometimes it's easy pickings. I've said many times, the NCAA at times can be like the schoolyard bully on an elementary school campus. There's a kid walking around with glasses, and he's got his all his pencils in his shirt, and he's small and frail, and they like to pick on that guy. But the big kid that's walking around, that's a whole lot bigger and stronger than everybody else, they don't really pick on them as much. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one, I think from the NCAA standpoint, they know from a legal standpoint that certain schools have the financial resources to fight the NCAA. And a lot of times it's very, very expensive to do that. And also I think the NCAA, when selling the NCAA basketball tournament, for example, they're going to sell a 3-week basketball tournament to CBS, Turner, Fox, ESPN, and create a television contract, which I think our last contract in college basketball, I think, was over $1 billion over a 7-year period. And when you're talking about the NCAA selling their product, which is college basketball and the college basketball tournament, to TNT, to CBS, for a lot of money, obviously you don't want your marquee schools, the best schools, the brightest schools, to be absent from the tournament. And so I think over time what happens is the NCAA, they understand that the best schools need to participate. And in college basketball, you're talking about Duke, Carolina, Indiana, Kentucky, UCLA, Kansas, Louisville. The list goes on and on and on of some of the premier programs. And so it would hurt college basketball and the NCAA in their ability to negotiate a contract if all those teams weren't a part of the NCAA tournament. So there's a lot of ways to look at it. I've been on every side of the equation. I've coached at smaller schools, which we call the mid-major schools. I've coached at the high-profile schools that are in the ACC and the SEC. I've been a head coach at schools in all of those. I was at UCLA for 7 years. I worked at ESPN for 2 years, and so I've seen college basketball from all different angles, and obviously I have some pretty strong feelings about it.
Mark, I got a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
What characteristics did you want to instill into your players when you were coaching?
There's so many things when you're a coach and things that you want to instill into your players outside of, the X's and O's of coaching the game. If you're coaching football and, you want guys to learn the fundamentals of the game, just like college basketball, that's what we do. But at the same time, I think coaches understand and realize that what a tremendous opportunity that we have with young people to not only, teach the game and teach fundamentals, but also teach amazing lessons about life. And, for me, I always had a saying when I was a head coach that you have to play through. And that's something I think our players would even say to me at times, even in timeouts, late game, 2 minutes to go in the game, tie game, everything's on the line. And I could hear our players even say, and play through, you got to play through. And what I meant by that was you have to play through so many different things. You've got to play through an official making bad calls. You've got to play through the coach yelling at you. You got to play through the fact that, you've missed 5 foul shots in a row, and you've got to play through all the time. I think so many times there's a mental side of coaching where, especially young people and even guys that play at the highest level in the NBA, they get kind of tangled in their own web and they can't play through. They can't play through mistakes. You've got to play through the fact that your flight last night into the game was delayed 3 hours and we had to sit in the FBO waiting on our charter plane, or the bus broke down on the way to the game and you didn't get as many hours of sleep as you would have liked to. You have to play through all those things. I used to tell players, you got to play through your girlfriend breaking up with you. You got to play through the fact that your mom and dad think you ought to shoot the ball every single time you touch it. You got to play through the fact that you think the referee has it out for you and that he's just calling, making calls that are against you. You got to play through everything. And I think what happens with that is then you translate that to life, and we all have to do that. You got to play through things every day. You've got to play through unexpected expenses that come up that you had no idea. You got to play through the fact that your car broke down and you may not have enough money for new tires right now. There's so many things in life that I think you have to play through. And that was one of the things that I thought with our players all the time that I wanted them to learn. I think there's another thing that, I always wanted our players to have a positive approach every day, to create enthusiasm, to be upbeat. So I had a thing with players throughout the years where if I said, "How are you doing?" they had 1 of 5 answers: good, great, terrific, fantastic, and sensational. So if I saw them on campus, if they were walking across campus and I said, "Hey, Bob, how you doing today?" I expected to hear, "Good, coach," "Great, coach," or "Coach, I'm sensational today. I'm fantastic today." And you'd be surprised at how many times just by expressing something in a positive way, it not only lifts your own spirit, it lifts the spirit of those people around you, as opposed to walking in practice, walking into the locker room, before the game. "How you doing today, Bob?" "Nah, not doing so good." And I would tell my players, my door is always open. We could always come talk about whatever issues you got going on. But at the same time, when I say, "Hey, how you doing today?" "Coach, I'm fantastic." And it just changes the game. It changes the room. It changes practice. It changes everything about what we're doing every day. So just the fact that you can be positive every day, I think, is it's such an important thing. Another thing for me was time, understanding how to be on time. A lot of people don't realize in athletics there's so many lessons to learn, but one of the lessons is that you have the ability to teach young people that time matters, being on time. It's not acceptable to be late. It won't be acceptable for you to be late to a meeting one day. It's not acceptable for you to be late to class. I used to tell guys all the time, if I'm a professor and I'm teaching class and I'm up and I've already started my lesson, I'm on the board, and here you come walking in 10 minutes late. First of all, it's an interruption. Second of all, what you're saying is that your time is more important than my time if I'm the professor. And your time is not more important than my time. So I was raised in a way where time and being timely and being on time and being 5 minutes early or 10 minutes early, that's just standard. That's the way you should operate, because it's somewhat rude for you to think people should always wait for you. They always have to wait for me. The bus will wait for me. No, the bus is not going to wait for you. When it's time to go, it's time to go. And you need to understand that. So for me, teaching guys about time, teaching guys how to play through, I think all those are there's so many lessons, I think, and all the great coaches, if you interview great coaches, players, those players who played for guys, they will be able to tell you those lessons and those things they were learning, from that coach all of the time throughout their run with them. And, I just loved guys that were positive every day, upbeat, positive, enthusiastic, energetic. And I just think you get a whole lot more done when those things are a part of it.
All right, I got one more question. This is kind of a curveball. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. But do you think the NCAA should give Reggie Bush back his Heisman Trophy?
I think it's a great question. Should Reggie Bush get his Heisman Trophy back? And I would say this answer. Unequivocally, I didn't say that word right, unequivocally, absolutely, without question, without doubt, yes. I think it's probably one of the greatest travesties in sports with Reggie Bush. And, again, I look at the NCAA at times, and on one hand, I understand they've got a difficult job. On the other hand, I think there are times when they just flex their muscles. And for me, as I watched from a distance, that was a period where I think they just flexed their muscles. They lost in a lawsuit. You've come to a place now where NIL is a part of everything. Guys and girls and student athletes can get, $100,000 for an hour worth of autographs if a collective or an NCAA or some entity chooses to. So I think with the NCAA, they would never ask me my advice. I know that because of my feelings to them. But if they ever did ask me my advice, I would say without a doubt he should have that trophy back. And for him, he's a great, great player who, on top of being a great player, he has shown to be a great ambassador for so many other things in life. And so for me, without a doubt, I'd like to see Reggie Bush have his trophy back.